Because at this point, first of all, let me tell you, in any ordinary session, I'd be telling you where Mrs. Close went to school and all the boards that she sits on, and a whole lot of other details that you'll have forgotten in about 10 minutes. So I'm going to introduce her in a way that's, I think, sort of fitting for her. Now, first of all, let me tell you that she finds any introduction painful, much less public attention. So I will tell you sincerely, I believe she's here tonight because she's so honored by your invitation, because she does really genuinely respect her foundation colleagues, and she never says no to a good cause. And hopefully it's going to give her a chance to talk about something she really cares about, the greenway. So we'll be getting to that. So what kind of introduction would suit her? Well, first of all, Mrs. Close is the daughter of Elliot Springs, one of this country's true Renaissance men. Mrs. Close, can you tell us a little bit about your father?
Well, he was first a World War I fighter pilot, though I don't think they called him fighter pilot.
Flying ace.
He was an ace in the First World War. And then he came home and he wrote books and articles about not only the dog fights and the flying, but about kind of the high living the pilots indulged in. And some people took a dim view of that. Rising. But then when his father died in 1930, and this was in the roaring 20s, and I didn't see much of my father when I was very small. He was in Atlanta or New York and living the good life and writing. And his father died, and he had to take over 7 failing cotton mills at the beginning of the Depression. So things changed dramatically from then. He just shut one door and took over the mills at a very bad time. There was, in addition to the Depression and the debts the mill had, there were union problems that it was just a very hard time to take over a business, so he devoted himself 100% to that.
And he had some pretty interesting and forward-thinking practices that were part of his management style.
He did, indeed. He inherited, as I say, the job of running 7. They were sort of spread out cotton mills, and he combined them into the Springs cotton mills. And he did a lot of things he would nowadays would be considered very paternalistic with a pejorative sense on it. But in those days, he did what he thought was best for what he called his people, the mill people. And he started from a credit union because he was angry that the payday loaners people would charge him so much to cash their checks that they could get them, So he started a credit union, which has evolved into Founders, which is a big credit union now. And they had a cafeteria. Nobody had a cafeteria in the mill before, so people could eat at work. And he started mill villages. They were all clustered around the mill because in those days I can remember when they blew the siren at 5 in the morning, so wake up the people for the shift that started at 6 o'clock. So you all lived within earshot of that siren. But he started some houses that were more out of town, so people could have their own gardens and grow their own food, and they had sidewalks that came all the way to the middle from there. Those houses were later sold, but they're still there. And he did a lot of things for what he thought was best for his people. And one of the things, right after the war, this was later on, he said he was going to build a golf course because there's no recreation in these mill towns except the baseball teams that played each other. And he was going to build a golf course. Somebody said, litheads don't play golf. And he said, well, they might if they had a chance. So he built a golf course, and some of them became very good golfers. So, and that was the beginning of recreation. He did a lot of things for recreation, which we still part of our foundation is supporting the recreation in these towns. And as the towns have grown, they have taken it over, but in the beginning, it was part of the foundation's mission to have affordable recreation in these small towns.
Well, my information shows that he also helped introduce healthcare benefits and profit sharing, and if that's paternalistic, I want a lot more paternalism. That sounds pretty great. Now, your mother's family, more New York, the Lies were general contractors, and they had quite a claim to fame in terms of
my
their work.
grandfather's construction company built the Chrysler building, and I was telling him coming down, I just list I can't read, so I listened to books, and I read a book about it. They kept talking about the Fred P. Lee company. I thought, what the, they can't pronounce his name right. So.
Audiobooks, we're not, it was the Lie company, not the Lee company.
But my mother was a Yankee, and she was always a Yankee.
You loved her anyway. Now, one of my favorite things from childhood is that when you were returning from the 1936 Berlin Olympics, you came back on the Hindenburg.
That part's correct. I did not go to the Olympics. My mother went to the
What else?
Olympics.
You were just with her.
We went. My father liked anything new and different, so when he took us to Germany, and with my brother and my mother, myself, and my German governess, and he flew home on the Hindenburg in July. And he sent my mother a telegram, which we have a copy. We have the original copy of it. And he said, perfectly safe. Bring the children. So my mother, had deposited myself and my brother. She had this idea she would leave us find a summer camp somewhere and deposit us so she could travel around. And apparently they don't have summer camps over there. But she found a family that took us. So we stayed in Switzerland with a wonderful family. It turned out okay. But while we were there, she went to the Olympics. And she was there when Jesse Owens won the gold medal. And Hitler was in the stadium and he refused to give the medal and stormed out of the stadium. So he had sort of shown his colors at that time. So when Mother got the tickets, there were 5 of us. There was my brother, myself, and my German governess, and her brother. Her younger brother had just graduated from Princeton. This was his graduation present. So there were 5 of us. So they, I think, gave her ticket number 1,000. And they had a little dinner at the Frankfurt Hotel, and presented her with this platter that's made out of beryllium, which is a very lightweight stuff that was in the Hindenburg. And they all went, Heil Hitler, like this. But we didn't howl. But they let us go anyway. So we got on the Hindenburg, and the first thing they did, if you smoked, they took your cigars or pipes or cigarettes or lighters, matches, anything like that, away from you, and put them in a steel box. And the purser kept it. And if you wanted to smoke, which my mother did a lot, you went in this thing that looked like a big glass telephone. Y'all don't know what a telephone booth is. I was talking to a bunch of 3rd graders that we do a history tour, and I said, the telephone booth, and they looked at me and what's the telephone booth? Maybe some of y'all remember telephone booth. But this looked like a big glass telephone booth, and you'd go in there and smoke, and then you'd have to give it back to them and go out. But she spent a lot of time doing that. And, but everything was made out of this very lightweight, and I can remember a piano that was very tinkly, but it was made out of aluminum. So we came over on the Hindenburg in in September of '36. And it went back to Germany. And on the first trip in the next year, in May, is when it blew up. So there are 2 other people. Last time we checked was in the 90s, and there were 2 other men alive who had done it.
Who had been on the Hindenburg.
Across the ocean on the Hindenburg. So I may be the last man standing. So,
well, you stand very well, because in the next part of the introduction, I have to say that you are the only person to have completed all 19 Ironman challenges at the Greenway Rec Center that bears your name, and the last one was
When, this year?
Yes, 3 months ago.
Well, not only that, I worse than that. It's not all that bad, it really is. Angie's done it. Didn't you do it?
You don't mean that if Angie does it, everybody can?
I got a lot of people to do it, but you have to do what is an Ironman, which is a marathon and 112 miles on a bike and 2.5 miles swimming. But you have a month to do it, and the idea is not to see who can finish first, but to get you doing it every day so you continue to do it. So I opened my big mouth having and said, well, I'll just do it every month. So I'm
Every month.
I'm trying to do it every month for a year.
Yeah, but she did it 2.5 miles the first day.
Yeah.
And I did all the swimming the first day.
Swimming the first time. Oh, Lord. You have climbed Mount LeConte in Tennessee 40 times in the last 50 years?
Yep.
And the next one is, you're planning?
Next in July. We're going
In July will be the next climb. Mount Kilimanjaro 3 times at age 57, 73, and 78.
It was fun. I recommend it. I bet there are other people here.
Okay, everyone else has climbed Mount Kilimanjaro. Please raise your hand. That'd be no one. Okay. She is famous for her global bike trips, doing 35 miles a day throughout the U.S., Vietnam, and this year you're doing?
We're going to France.
France, you're going to do France. And oh, just by the way, and when you get back from France a week later?
Where am I going then? Africa.
For a walking safari in Zimbabwe. Yes. Just a second. You've run the New York Marathon? You went
once.
Only once. You've been bungee jumping in New Zealand at age 69.
Well, if you're over 65, it's free, so I couldn't afford not to. Okay. And I'd do that again.
You would do that again?
I would do that again. That was, I don't mind being scared, but I'm not going to do anything life-threatening.
And bungee jumping is it
Bungee jumping, if it's legitimate, where I was, there was no way you could get hurt.
Okay.
You could scare yourself.
You can scare yourself.
I jumped out of a plane.
Yeah, I was just going to say, now about 3 years ago, you took your 2 granddaughters skydiving.
That was her graduation present.
That was a graduation present.
And I would not do that again. You could get hurt.
So, now, by the way, lest you not have figured it out by now, Mrs. Close does all of this stuff with macular degeneration. So the nice thing for her is that she cannot see most of you.
If anybody I knew and didn't speak to it, please don't be offended.
And did I mention that she is 87 years young? Just a couple of other things before we get to some memories. For more than 30 years, you've been teaching horseback riding to disabled children. How did that come about?
Well, we had some whales. And actually, one of my daughters was studying at Winthrop. She was doing special ed stuff, and she brought us with her, and we thought, well, we can do this. So we started, and it's been over 30 years, and we started with first, we do it with the recreation department, and they bring children one day and grown-ups another day, and then recently we started doing it with the schools, and we do a big program with the special ed classes at school, and it's very volunteer related. We couldn't do it without wonderful volunteers, and I have volunteers that have been coming for 25 years because it's such a satisfying, you get sort of instant gratification. Those kids enjoy it so much that, you know, the kids that can't walk can get on a horse and move around. So I just really enjoy that, but it's totally dependent upon these wonderful volunteers.
Of which you are
Well,
one of them.
They won't let me lead anymore.
They won't let you lead anymore. Well, you know, vision will do that to you. One of my very favorite memories of Mrs. Close is I had come out to do some work with the family and the board, and Mrs. Close likes to eat breakfast at 8 o'clock. Now, I should tell you that I've never met a breakfast that was worth 8 o'clock, but Mrs. Close is. And so about 7:30 in the morning, I'm sitting out looking at this wonderful sort of misty morning, and through the mist she walks in her boots and her jeans and a black t-shirt with a neon green Obama sign, and there's a peace sign in the O, and a red kerchief in the back pocket. And the reason you said you have a red kerchief is because
Cowboys always have.
Cowboys always have a red. Mrs. Close obviously has a number of nonprofit obligations. She's a tireless fundraiser for her greenway we'll talk about in a little bit. She's the matriarch of her family and foundation for more than 50 years. She has 8 children, accomplished corporate and foundation executives, physicians, ministers. Am I leaving any professions out? There's some pretty accomplished 8 of them. 28 grandchildren, 15 great-grandchildren. Your great-grandfather started the business that became Springs Textile. You talked a little bit about your father and your history. Can you say a little bit about how your family came to this area and how this commitment to the Fort Mills area developed?
Well, my father's mother family were successful plantation owners before the war, and his father had the next door family with the next door plantation. Okay. So he on both sides family had been there since the late 1700s.
Okay.
They mostly Scotch-Irish came down from New York and Pennsylvania, settled there, and were successful plantation owners. And the daughter of one plantation had the son of another, and my father was the only child. And he was the only child of an only child, and I'm now an only child. So when I produced 8, it sort of broke the mold.
When I read that your father was sometimes called a barnstormer, I thought that might be a good description of you. Were there qualities about your father or mother you remember or admired?
Well, I guess I said all the Springs is, I like to say, are independent. Other people might say stubborn, but
You have the mic.
they're all
Independent.
I would say my children. People sometimes say I have 2 children and they're opposites. I said, well, I've got 8 and they're opposites. And what do they all have in common? They're all very independent thinkers. All except perhaps Will are stubborn. I would say, Greg, I have my grandson is here. Would you agree?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am. You can prepare to say yes, ma'am, a few times, I think, right? Now, tell us about, you had a very influential German nanny. Her influence still continues. Can you tell us about her?
Probably the biggest influence in my life was my German nanny. And she wasn't now, I'll have to go back, she was a governess, and there is a big difference between a governess and a nanny.
Tell us what the difference is.
But the reason I had, my father flew, as I said, in World War I, and he trained at Oxford, and he loved everything English, was wonderful, and English children had governesses. And so he thought that, but he also was frustrated that he couldn't speak French when he went to France. So he thought everybody ought to have another language. So that's how I ended up with a German governess who was not allowed to speak English to me and my brother. So we grew up kind of bilingual. We spoke German until we went to school. But he thought that's, but I was and I sort of resented a governess. Look at the root of the word, it's govern. A nanny is like a mother's helper. A governess is in charge. And if you're a German in charge, you are in charge. But I was very fortunate in that this woman was way ahead of her time in a lot of ways. She was a conservationist, a nutritionist, and all these things long before her time. For instance, we ate something called degeneration for supper every night. I thought that's what everybody had for supper every night until I went to school and found out other people had fried chicken. But degeneration, rolled oats, and whatever fruit was in season, local, was you to have oats and grind up this fruit and nuts, and that's what we had. We ate fruit, cereal, and nuts. And she also believed in exercise and being outdoors. It was, now this still haunts me to this day. If the sun is out, you're outside. It is sinful to be inside. And she was a very religious woman. So that meant something. You did not hang around in the house if the sun was shining out. We also walked, I used to say a mile a day, but now I finally, in my old age, realized we walked a mile to a certain tree and back. We walked 2 miles every day. So I was brought up with that ethic, and I'm very, very grateful for that. She certainly taught me got a good start in exercise, nutrition, and that sort of thing. And taking care of conservation too. This is God's earth, and we darn well better take care of it. So I had that drummed into me from an early age.
Now, you had a brother, but he passed away at age 22. You've often had to be the one alone. Your father died relatively young, and your mother passed away shortly thereafter. Your brother your husband passed away relatively young. How have you managed so much responsibility for so many things by yourself?
Well, I had no choice, I guess. I don't feel that I felt like, with the foundation and the business and the property that was left, my father left everything to his 8 grandchildren. This is one of those generation skipping things at the time, that tax, all that. So everything went to his grandchildren. So my role, I felt, was more as a steward of things to pass on. I was trustee till the youngest one got to be 21 or something like that. But I felt myself that I was a steward of his property, what he left.
And your children have all grown up pretty
But he left the
satisfying.
responsibility, and he did that. And his mantra, which we'll get into, was that everything we have, this family has, and we've been very blessed, came from the sweat of the brow of those people in the mill and is going back to there. So that's why our foundation is totally geographically limited to where those mills were. You want everything that we made to go back into those communities. So that our foundation is very limited geographically, but not, he said where his money was going, but how it went. He left very flexible, so we've been able to, as times have changed, which they certainly have in the mill community, as you all know, we were able to adapt and move on.
Now, a lot of families, and I've bet a lot of them here, when they get to the 3rd generation, and certainly the 4th, which would be your children and grandchildren, they find that geography is not important to those children. They didn't live there, they don't have any knowledge of it, they just assume give it in the areas where they're living. How have you been able to maintain this? You just told us how your father came to want to return that to this area. How have you been able to keep the geographic focus in your family?
Well, there wasn't never any question that that's the way it was going to be. I mean, he said it was going to be that way, it's going to be that way. And we've never tried to change that. It wasn't I don't know, the generations, because I was just one in my generation, so I kind of skipped that. So the next generation would be my 8 children. And they all went on the board when they were 21, as I. But they all grew up in Fort Mill. They lived in Fort Mill. They know the area and their community, so that wasn't so much of a problem. But when the next generation came along, they're scattered. I have a daughter in Seattle and a son in Rhode Island, and children in Charlotte. So they've grown up. So they've been different. So that's when we had to make some decisions about how to continue the donor's intent and still have it be a family foundation. So we worked for years with Jenny's help, big help, and a lot of work, and worked out a way for the next generation, which are my grandchildren, to come on the board. They had to do certain things. They didn't come on automatically. We set 2 seats on the board for next generations as they came along. They had to go to some of these meetings. They had to have a project they were involved in, go on site visits and all that, and if they showed an interest. And pretty much if they lived in the area, they got to see on that board. And we've had one that did all those things, came on the board as a next generation, but then has moved on and has a seat that is not designated as next generation. And Greg here, who's just finished law school and is in South Carolina, has one of the next generation seats. So as they come along, and it's been the ones that have lived in the area. But in addition to that, we have worked simultaneously to bring in community members, more people from the community on the board. And we started with a community advisory committee. And we worked very hard to set that up and have people from each community and people with different interests, and a very diverse board. And that has been very successful. And now we have well, the chairman of that is on the board, and we have 3 other communities. So now there are 4, is that right, Ann? 4 people from the community sit on the board.
They take up
And
children's.
and 2 of my children, the one that lives in Seattle and the one that lives in Rhode Island, said they would give up their seats to a community member because they thought that they felt that was the appropriate thing to do, and they wanted someone in the community to have that seat on the board. So that was they volunteered to do that, and we were very happy that they did. So that's pretty much how we have dealt with getting them on, giving them a path to get on if they want to and do certain things. Now,
So there's some requirements.
there are requirements
And some commitment to the mission.
some, I wouldn't say if one of them that lives, I don't know, farther away, but was interested and was willing to spend time, but I don't think there's nothing that says they can't do it.
What's the best part about doing this work with your children and grandchildren? Quick, think hard.
Greg, what do you think? Well, I don't know. I've been very pleased with the way they worked to get this transition done. That they have all had input and cooperated, and so far it's worked extremely well. Now, you were a big help in getting us, Jenny sits down with you and gets everybody's thoughts out on the table, and it was a big help to have. We've had 2 or 3 retreats where we discuss this thing, and then we come up with guidelines that we work in. It's really, I've been very, that I guess has been my biggest, I guess the fact that it has smoothly moved forward, and we have been able to adapt to the changing times as well as we have.
Okay, but now what makes you crazy?
Oh, Lord. I'm too old to get crazy.
There you go. All those independent thinkers.
Oh, I'll let them, they don't bother me too much anymore.
Okay. That's good. One of my other favorite stories is we once sent a writer, the National Center sent a writer down to Fort Mills to interview the Mrs. Close and the Springs family, and the writer got lost, which is really hard, but she did. And she pulled over and she asked someone if they could direct her to the Springs Foundation in Fort Mill, and the man said to the writer, "Ma'am, Fort Mill is the Springs Foundation. So when the recession hit, 4 years ago, Angie? Or 4 years ago?
4.5.
4.5. You and your family board reinforced your commitment to the 3 counties. You changed the focus of your grant making a bit, though, to make sure some needs were met. Can you tell us about that decision?
Yeah, that was a retreat that we've done a lot in education. We've been very big with the schools and all that, but now we have a wonderful school system, and we just felt like the majority, and this is more, a lot of the younger ones, felt that we should focus on, they call it the lower 10%, very low income people that were really, really struggling now. And so we do a lot with the food banks, with emergency medical clinics and things like that, that reach the very people who are hardest hit by this recession. And that was a unanimous decision. Everybody agreed on it, but just recently I'm getting these kind of things that some of the, especially older ones, feel like maybe it's time not to be so strict about it. We said, that, if we do it, we're going to do it. We're not going to do it halfway.
Temporary.
So it was temporary, but we're going to do it completely when we do it. So, but now I think there's some feelings that maybe we need to broaden it a little bit as things get better.
Well, if I may add,
Yes, but we might have to speak a little louder.
the closing of all the mills
Right.
in our area, we were very concerned about the high unemployment.
Yeah, we had, the recession hit just about the time.
21% in the counties that we had served.
Yeah.
And so we decided, emergency needs, basic critical needs, that we needed to
Things shifted to
dedicate
that.
that,
Mhm.
our grant making.
Yeah, it was a remarkable shift. Let's just switch back a little bit. Your family home has a pretty terrific history. The White Homestead. And can you tell us you're showing your house to Bill Clinton? He asked you a very funny question one time.
No, I don't know what you're talking about. When I met him at the door, he'd gone to Charlotte for the Final Four of the basketball tournament because he told Arkansas if they were in the finals, he'd come. So he had to. So he came and he stayed with us, and he arrived about midnight, which is not my finest hour. And I welcomed him, and I said he was our second president. He said, oh, and I said, yes, Jefferson Davis stayed here first.
Yes. Now, I know there's some argument from other people in South Carolina, so I looked it up, and the White Homestead was also the home to the last meeting of the full cabinet
That's why
of the
No,
Confederacy.
Abbeville.
somebody resigned in my front yard.
That's right. I looked it up, Frank, I swear. You somebody named cabinet.
The postmaster general resigned.
In
So
your
there was
front
not a
yard.
full cabinet meeting after that, because he thought he could go faster by himself and left.
Did he get, none
I
of
don't
them
know
got
what
to
happened.
Mexico, yeah.
No, they got his way and they got caught.
Now, I know this is really hard. I don't want you to be modest, but before we turn it over to questions, I know Mrs. Close noticed that on the original
It said
agenda,
8:30,
it said 8:30, so she
half
goes,
hour
Jenny, we
over.
only have to talk for 10 minutes. If you had to give these folks some encouragement to keep at it, the things that have made this a lifelong and such a wonderful activity for you and for your family, what do you think?
I don't give advice.
You don't give advice? Tell me why you don't give advice. That might be
He'll
it.
come back and bite you.
Okay, then I will come back to my, then I will switch it around a little bit and say, what do you think has made it work for all these years? This foundation was started by your father.
Well, I think he was very precise in what his goal was, and that was to get the money back where it came from. but he was very flexible in how to do that. The only thing it says for the enrichment of life, the creation of value of life in these communities. And we had the responsibility and the privilege of deciding how to do that. And that has worked very well for our foundation. I think we have stuck very close to the donor intent, and I think it's set up so it will continue that way because we brought in these community people that will eventually probably be the majority of it. I don't know that it will, I don't know how it will go, but it will always, I think, have the donor intent. But the flexibility has enabled us to do things like when this recession hit and the mills closed, to change our focus. There was a time when education was bad need of support, and that was back in the 60s. My father died in 59, and there was a large infusion of cash or money into the foundation. And we were trying to think, now what can we do to help the most people? And one of the things we felt like was getting good teachers in our schools. And one of the things we did, any teacher that wanted to get her master's, we would give money for that. So we have lots of masters now, and they make more money, and that attracts more people. So that has helped our schools a lot. And so education, and we gave to each school, we gave perhaps a percentage of their, we get their numbers, how many schools, and we give a certain amount to each school. So we did a lot with the schools during a time when they really needed it. So we were able to change. And recreation, as the towns took it over, we could, pull back and do something else. So it is work that we can do the donor intent, but we can change with the time. And that to me has been the genius of the way he set it up.
And before I want to get to the last question, which is the piece of your future, I want to invite, is there anybody here who would like to ask Mrs. Close a question?
Jenny.
Yes, Chair.
I don't want to ask a question, but I guess this whole group needs to know that maybe we're in that tier of Jeff Davis and Bill Clinton, but the very first family foundation convening of this group was also in their home. The first time this group ever decided or thought about trying to get together, Will invited us to come to their home. And it was a very, very small group, but that was the
and that's what I thought I was going to speak to, was a very small group.
Yeah.
So
I got blindsided.
I have to say that it was your family's generosity and inspiration to convene and ask these family foundations, a group of maybe 8 or 10 or 12, to come to your home, and this is what it's turned into. So I just want to thank you very, very much.
Thank you for that, and thank you, and Will was president of the foundation at that time, and he was president when we did the transition, the next generation, and also when we did the community, brought the community into it. So he did a lot in the time that he was there. And another piece of history, nobody here probably, maybe Frank would remember, Charlie Bundy.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Charlie was our first when, after my father died, then we had to hire somebody to help us with the foundation. We hired Charlie Bundy. And he was one of the founders of the Southeastern. He was on the first board.
Well, the meeting was in your home.
There you go.
So,
They were charter members of the Southeastern Council.
he was very into that and thought it was very important.
I think I was in like 5th grade or something.
Yeah, 12. Okay, does anybody else have a question for Mrs. Close? Well, I'm going to pass you to close on I think, probably one of your favorite topics these days, which is going to define a whole lot of the future of Fort Mill and your philanthropy, and that is the Ann Springs Close Greenway.
Okay.
Tell us what that is. And
The Greenway is 2,100 acres of green space in Fort Mill. It's kind of in between Fort Mill and Charlotte. And Charlotte was about to swallow up Fort Mill like it swallowed up Pineville. This tiny little town in between disappeared. And well, back in the 80s, I wanted to preserve some land, save some farmland, really. We had those 2 plantations where had been in cotton. Now they were in peaches, and we had pastures with cows. And it had all been a rural area at one point, and it was just rampant development. I've got nothing against development, but this was just encroaching, and all the farmland was disappearing. In fact, the Charlotte area was losing more farmland than any other metropolitan area in the country at the time. So I wanted to save some land. As I say sometimes, I just said I had to save a few trees, but I ended up convincing this land, as I said before, my father did this generation skipping thing. So the land, I didn't own an acre of this, not an acre. But the children owned it all. And they had undivided shares, which means all 8 of them owned it, and any one of them had a veto. So they all had to agree on something. And I think I've mentioned they were all independent thinkers. So they never ever agreed on anything before or since, I don't think. But eventually they were all persuaded that this was a good idea. Some of them they owned between them, the 8 of them, I think it was about 6,000 acres. But they were, and some of them would put a conservation easement on all of it. Others would have preferred to do less. But they eventually agreed, after much study, that this 21 acres they would give away give it to a nonprofit, which turned out to be the Roy Springs Company, which is a nonprofit recreation provider. But it also has a conservation easement, which a land trust owns, so it can never ever be developed. So this all happened. Actually, it happened right after Hugo. We signed the papers by candlelight at Will's house because nobody had electricity. So we were all in there swimming away by candlelight to do this. And it has turned into, as development has become even more, I mean, it's just practically surrounded. Elle tells people, it's twice the size of Central Park. And someday it will be like Central Park, totally surrounded by development. So it has turned into it's taken many years for it to develop. But now people recognize it will be our family legacy because it will be there for Elliot Springs. Mills went to Brazil, but the greenway's not going anywhere. So now it has become, and Charlotte has sort of found it, and they use it tremendously. So and the foundation has supported it because it doesn't make money. It doesn't break even anywhere near. So we're doing a capital campaign right now to try to raise money to do some things on the greenway to accommodate all these people. I think it's close to 100,000 people a year are coming. Walk, hike, ride, bike. We have festivals, and it's just really grown a lot. So I was talking to Judy was asking me earlier. I've now had to go out for the first time and ask for money. I've never done big money. You go to somebody.
We're passing the cup around.
So I'm learning the other side of it.
Yeah.
It's interesting to do
Now,
that.
is this in North Carolina or where is it?
It's just south of Charlotte, North Carolina.
Is it in the South Carolina part of the
Yes.
suburb?
It's in South Carolina.
Because I thought you said Fort Worth was in South Carolina.
Yes.
Fort
It
Mill,
is.
South Carolina, but we're just, the borderline is just north of the
You're
Greenway.
encroaching.
Charlotte, South
No, they
Carolina.
were coming.
No, they're encroaching on South Carolina.
So the 2,100 acres was
Coming
to
south.
say stop.
Charlotte was
So-
moving south, and
so-
another little town, but it disappeared, it was gone. Pineville's no more there.
So one day you will be able to bring your families to the Ann Springs Close Greenway for all of the incredible outdoor activities that are being planned for that wonderful outdoor space forever and ever. And speaking of forever and ever, the influence that you've had on not just your family and the Fort Mills area, but all of us, especially here tonight, would you please join me in thanking Mrs. Close?